Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. Fact or fiction? Why did Yang Shaohou kill himself? So I haven't done fact or fiction video in quite some time, and this video actually wasn't planned. I have quite a number of videos that I'm planning to make in the near future. Today's video wasn't part of the plan. However, I decided to make this quick video because I came across a very interesting source on this regard from Facebook, and I thought it would be quite interesting to share it with my viewers, especially those that are interested in the history of Yang family Tai Chi. So those of you who have watched my fact or fiction previous video on the downfall of Yang family will remember that in that video I briefly touched on one of the major reasons of the downfall to the Yang family legend and its invincible Tai Chi has two main factors, right? First of all, the third generation's second eldest son, which is Yang Shaohou, he committed suicide, and his younger brother Yang Shaohou wasn't the type of person who liked to engage in fighting, and therefore he doesn't know how to fight, and which is why the knowledge of how to fight with Yang family Tai Chi has been lost since the third generation. Tai Chi, just like any other form of fighting discipline, need to be a living art and living knowledge. Okay, so if one generation that does not know how to fight and have no personal experience on fighting, then they don't have the correct knowledge and experience to pass on to the next generation. And this is what basically happened during the third generation of Yang family, which is why after Yang Shaohou, because he doesn't know how to fight with his family art, everyone that came after him has no knowledge of how the previous generation used their family art to fight, and therefore if you look at the modern day, everyone's got their own idea, but no one could actually agree on the same thing. Everyone just invents their own interpretation on how to fight with Yang style Tai Chi, but the original way is lost. The best we can do is to take an educational guess, but of course majority of the people who teach Yang family or any family Tai Chi for that matter in today's world, they have no fighting experience themselves, so whatever they conjure up as an explanation on how to fight with whatever they teach are most likely rubbish. I'm also aware of schools and practitioners who claim to represent the fighting side of Tai Chi, but when you see them actually compete in the ring, they're basically doing boxing or sanda with jab, cross, hook, and uppercut. Obviously, people like that, they will argue that all fighting styles fight the same way. But I will counter-argue by that, then why do you even bother train anything to train in Tai Chi? If jab, cross, uppercut, and hook is all you do when you're in a fight, then your training mode should be pretty identical to the modern boxing. But when we actually examine the training method passed down from any Tai Chi lineage, we can clearly see that this training method is quite different from boxing. From that, we can basically deduce that Tai Chi definitely does not fight exactly like boxing. Of course, there's nothing wrong with boxing, but if you want to represent Tai Chi, then you can't actually end up fighting like boxing and call it Tai Chi. But again, this is not the topic of today. This is just to set up the premise of what we're going to discuss today. So, as I've already mentioned, one of the main important causes of the loss of the famous Yang family knowledge on fighting was due to the fact that Yang Shaohou committed suicide. And surrounding this incident, there has been a lot of rumor. One, for instance, there have been a group of people who pushes this rumor that Yang Shaohou had the challenge at the age of 67. He was afraid to lose and therefore lose his family faith, which is why instead of taking up to the challenge, he committed suicide. This rumor is clearly designed to smear the reputation of the Yang family. But it actually doesn't make sense at all, because if somebody challenges you and you killed yourself instead of accepting the challenge, then everyone would know that you couldn't win and you were scared to actually step up to the challenge. So by killing yourself, it doesn't actually change anything. It doesn't protect the family's reputation. It's just the same as losing a challenge. But at least if you step up to the fight, you could still win. But if you kill yourself, you definitely lost. So these kind of rumors are utterly nonsense and makes no sense. Now, just in case some of my viewers are unaware of who Yang Shaohou is, basically, Yang style Taiji was invented by the first generation Yang family master Yang Luchan. He has 3 sons. The eldest son passed away at an early age. His second son, Yang Banhou, and his third son, Yang Jianhou, was responsible for passing on the family art. His third son, Yang Jianhou, had 3 sons. And funny enough, the first one passed away. The second son was given the birth name of Yang Shaohou, but he later on changed his own name into Yang Shaohou. And the third son is a famous third generation Yang family master Yang Chengfu. So Yang Shaohou was very famous for his quick temper and his fighting ability. Among the third generation, he was the only one who, according to all the stories that I came across, he was the only third generation Yang family member who was very good at fighting, and he constantly took up challenges at a younger age and defeated a lot of people, much like his uncle Yang Banhou. In fact, his personality is more like his uncle than his father, and he also studied Yang style Taiji from his uncle. Now that we know who he is, let's look at how he died. So recently I came across a very interesting post from someone I know on Facebook called Wang Yueming. I assume that's his pronunciation of his name. He basically shared a news article from the time where Yang Shaohou committed suicide, and this news article explains exactly what happened. This is a very interesting article that I've never seen before, which is why I decided to make a quick video to share it with my viewers. And of course, all the credit goes to this person, Wang Yueming, for actually sharing or discovering and sharing this news article. So here you can see the original article, but obviously I assume that most of you can't read Chinese, so let me quickly explain what this article is saying. First, there's like a summary to the whole story. I'm going to skip that and just go to the main paragraph. So in the first main paragraph, it's saying that Yang Shaohou, originally from Yongnian County, which is a small town just outside of Beijing, he excels at the knowledge of Taiji Quan. The current transportation minister of the government, Wang Boqun, when he went to Beijing for a visit, due to friends' introduction, he met with Yang Shaohou. On the spring of the 18th year of the Republic government, Yang Shaohou traveled from Beijing to Nanjing, which is the capital of the Republic government at the time. The transportation minister Wang knew that he is basically the man when it comes to Taiji, and therefore he collected a bunch of friends and invited Yang Shaohou come to his own mansion and taught them Taiji with the excuse of, improving their health and physical body. Yang at the time was already pretty old and is struggling with life, especially that his son has no job and does no work, so the entire burden of the family lays on his shoulder. On top of that, Northerners living in the South, there are a lot of things that they are not accustomed to, they can't get used to. So Yang Shaohou's mental state was not very good and quite unstable, which is why in the same year, July, Minister Wang gifted Yang Shaohou some funding and sent him back home to Beijing. Now, Yang Shaohou went back to Beijing and for a few months had nothing to do at home, and therefore in the same year, November, due to his younger brother Yang Chengfu was invited to teach in the Zhejiang Guoshu Academy. Therefore, he decided to travel south again, this time with his younger brother. So upon arriving at Nanjing city, Yang Shaohou again stayed at the mansion of Minister Wang, and he pleaded Minister Wang to find him a stable job in Beijing. Of course, he doesn't like living in the south and he's not actually accustomed to it, so he needs to go back to the north, but he has no job there, so he's asking Minister Wang to find him a job. But now, according to Minister Wang, firstly, Yang Shaohou was really old, I believe at the time around 67, and secondly, he's not very literate. He might know a few simple words, but he's not fully literate, and therefore it's very hard to find him a regular job. So Minister Wang told him that he would need to wait a while for a suitable job, and he was planning to send him back to the north when the winter is over and the roads are easier to travel, and then try to find some friends from Beijing and Tianjin to introduce to learn Taiji from Yang Shaohou, and in doing so, solve Yang Shaohou's income issue and living cost. Then, on the 15th of the same month that this article is published, unfortunately I can't see the date of this article's publication, but on the 15th of whenever this article was published, Yang Shaohou in his room took a pair of scissors and cut himself and committed suicide. He was immediately discovered, and then they asked him why he committed suicide. He basically replied that family and life is too hard, so he's left with no other choice but to kill himself. Minister Wang immediately sent him to the closest hospital and also sent people to tell his brothers and family relatives to come and take care of him. However, due to the severe cut as well as how old Yang Shaohou was at the time already, the hospital wasn't able to save his life, and a few days later he passed away in the hospital bed. Then last bit is this Minister Wang's remark on this whole incident. He basically said, the Yang family's Taiji has now been split into many different lineages and branches. However, he believed that only Yang Shaohou's one is the most original or authentic version of Yang family Taiji. And sadly, due to this incident, it's like a great building just suddenly collapsed, and one of the most treasured national knowledge has been lost forever. And Minister Wang was very sad about this whole incident, and he basically paid for his funeral and all the other costs thereafter and gave money to Yang Shaohou's family. So basically this concludes the entire article. And from this we can see exactly how Yang Shaohou died, and definitely has nothing to do with any challenges or any other rumors that people make up these days. He basically was suffering from life, had no income, had nobody appreciating him, and therefore he decided to commit suicide. So now that we know exactly what happened, let's talk a little bit on this whole event. So clearly, Yang Shaohou has depression, right? I mean, obviously at the time, depression isn't something known to people, but from what we can see now, he clearly has depression because normal people, they can't commit suicide, right? If you take up your scissors and slit your throat, you can't do it. Okay, we have an inherent built-in device in our brain that prevents us from doing harm to ourselves. And occasionally, when someone is very, very emotional, for example, they will try to jump off a building, eat sleeping pill, jump off a bridge. When they are being saved, they will regret their decision. That's basically the type of suicide that are caused by someone who having a strong emotional fluctuation. But from Yang Shaohou's response, when asking him why he did it, we can see that he doesn't feel regretful about killing himself. He basically thinks life is hard, the family is disappointing, the society is disappointing, he doesn't want to live anymore. So basically that's a clear sign of a severe chronic depression. And why was he depressed? Well, from the article we can see quite clearly it's because obviously he has no income and has no job. But that's only the surface reason. The real reason is that he doesn't feel appreciated. And basically, if we put ourselves in his shoes, being one of the top young style master of his time, and he's been through very hard training at a young age. The young fighting training is very, very hard. So hard that the second generation master Yang Shaohou, he attempted to kill himself because his father forced him to train. So you can imagine how hard the training is that they are going through at the time. And Yang Shaohou willingly went through that training without complaint and came out a top master of Yang family Taiji. However, besides winning a lot of duels and having a good reputation as a great fighter of his time, he's actually not as appreciated as his younger brother Yang Shaohou. Now, I don't know exactly what type of relationship he has with his younger brother, and there are no real evidence to suggest one way or the other. But what we do know is Yang Shaohou is definitely better trained and more qualified than Yang Shaohou. However, Yang Shaohou had tons of students, especially rich students, that paid him a lot of money, and he had no issue with living expense and was pretty well off. And he was invited to all kind of places to teach Tai Chi, especially in government instated facilities such as the Zhejiang Guoshu Academy. So he was pretty well off and doing quite well all over the place. In comparison, Yang Shaohou has no real long-term disciples. So he has students here and there that he taught in short term, but as far as I know, he had no long-term disciple. And how do I come to this conclusion? Well, quite simply, in the Chinese martial art tradition, if you become a disciple of your master, you are like a son to a father. And whatever issue the father has, it basically falls onto your shoulder. You have to help him resolve it. And for what happened to Yang Shaohou at his older age, you can see that there was clearly no disciple that could look after him and resolve his living expense, which is why most likely he had no actual long-term disciple. And I will argue this is more depressing than not being able to support his family, because he's only ever done one thing his entire life, which is Yang family Tai Chi. But in the end, no one really recognizes him and want to learn from him. So he basically feels very underappreciated. And on top of that, his son didn't have a job and his family all relies on him, and he basically just sat and spent or ate up his own family's reserve, and eventually no longer had enough money to sustain his family. So that definitely adds to the overall depression. But I think the most important cause is the fact that people don't appreciate it. And what makes it worse is his younger brother, as well as many other people at the time, were all successfully profiting from teaching Tai Chi, but he was unable to do so. As to exactly why, it's hard to say, but one of the most likely guesses is basically that he teaches the traditional way of his family, and it's very hard and intense, and most of his students who come and try probably can't handle the training. However, unlike his younger brother, he had this type of integrity and was unwilling to compromise, to basically water down his family art in order to teach common students and to make money. He wanted to teach the real stuff, and probably because of that, he was unable to get any real long-term disciple. And we can know this because Yang Shaohou was heavily criticized for watering down his family style into something that all commoners can practice, and in doing so, he basically was able to attend a lot of students from all kinds of social status and physical condition, right? He wasn't picky, and therefore was able to amass a lot of students and therefore a lot of income. But his elder brother Yang Shaohou was the exact opposite. He wanted to keep the pure, real, authentic art from his family. And unfortunately at the time, no one really valued his knowledge and training, and therefore no one was willing to go through the hardship to learn from him. And as a result, he eventually killed himself, and that entire family knowledge of the Yang family Tai Chi pretty much died with him. And this kind of tragedy not only happened with Yang Shaohou or during the Republic era, it's still happening now. I've talked about this before in my videos, and I know masters in China, especially in Beijing, that are highly qualified, really skilled in both teaching, training, as well as sparring. And I mean fighting with traditional methods from his style and his training, right? Not the wolf in sheepskin type of thing where you claim to teach traditional but you fight like Sanda. I know genuine masters who fight exactly as the way they style intend to fight, and a lot of these masters are also struggling to find students. But luckily, the masters that I know all have other sources of income, so they don't have to end up struggling to pay for their own living expense and eventually kill themselves. However, it is still very sad to see these masters having so much knowledge and having gone through so much hardship and training in the youth days, and then in the end, not having it amount to anything, and sitting in their home and watching time goes by and their knowledge are slowly dying out. And in another 20, 30 years, when these masters pass away, then a big chunk of the real knowledge will pretty much be gone for good. And this is one of the main motivations that has been kept me going for all these years, is that I firstly think that it's quite fortunate for me to encounter these masters, because there are a lot of people who spend their whole life in the Chinese martial art community not able to find a genuine master. So I was fortunate enough to meet not one, but more than one genuine master. Right? I personally have 2 masters. Some of you who are following my channel should already know, and I have no others that I just can't have time to learn from. But I was fortunate enough to meet real masters, and seeing their current state and how their knowledge and art is gonna die out pretty soon, I realized that I should have the responsibility to try and learn as much as I can from them, and at least ensure that to the best I can, that some of the knowledge could be passed on. I can't say that I will basically inherit their knowledge and ensure that it passes on. I simply can't promise that. But what I can say is that I'll definitely try my best to learn as much as I can, and not just learn, you have to practice, right? Just learning is useless. You have to be able to train and be able to do what they do in order for the knowledge to pass on. And I also can't guarantee that whatever I got from my masters will be able to pass on to the next generation. That is not something I can decide on my own. I must be willing to teach, but there must also be people who are willing to learn, and must also have the time and the talent and the willingness to work hard. So there's a lot of different criteria that I have to meet for knowledge to be passed on. All I can do is to fulfill my part of the responsibility in this chain or ladder, but whatever outcome it is in the future, that's basically beyond my control. And that's actually the main purpose of me creating this channel, to basically share the knowledge that I took over 2 decades to search for and eventually acquire with viewers, especially in the West, who might never hear about them in their entire life without a type of bridge such as my channel as well as others out there. So the moral of the story is it was a true tragedy how Yang Shaohou ended up dying, and how the essence of Yang family combat has basically been lost. It's not the first, and it wouldn't be the last time it happens, and this kind of tragedy are still happening, even though it's less severe. People aren't committing suicide as far as I know, but knowledge are still being lost. So that's it for today. I hope you find this video interesting and informative. And if you do, please subscribe on my YouTube channel, and if you can support me on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated. As always, a big shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for supporting me throughout the years, especially through the pandemic. Well, if you have any questions about current content or suggestions for future content, always feel free to message me, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone we're still in the pandemic, so keep your social distance, wear your mask, sanitize your hands, stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching TriEssence Martial Art channel.